Welcome to Modleek. My name is Jeffrey Stern, and at Modleek we like to shed a little light a little spark about a Jewish tradition or text. Today I am recording from Hong Kong. I've spent the week in mainland China, and I think back to a book I read a while ago by Roger Kamenetz about a bunch of Jewish rabbis who went to visit the Dalai Lama. It's called The Jew in the Lotus, a rediscovery of Jewish identity in Buddhist India. And at one point, very early in the book, Roger makes the comment that I decided that the most important baggage Jews carry is an absolute conviction of our significance because we are Jews, because we have survived. On Route 1, the whole grand story of Jewish survival, the tremendous importance I attached to my history, my Torah, shrank in perspective to a single line, a single letter. I felt absurd in the middle of India. Did it really make any difference that we were Jews? And Roger made this comment because in a land of Buddhists and Sufists, when asked what a Jew was, Roger had to say, well, have you heard of Jesus? He was Jewish. They hadn't even heard of the Jewish people. So there's a certain humility you have when you travel and you go to parts of the world that they've not even heard of Jews. So today, we're going to discuss the chosen people, what it means to be chosen, the good, the bad, and the ugly. So sit back, buckle your seatbelts, and let's rediscover what it means to be chosen. As we come to the end of the book of Genesis, there's one theme that is consistent throughout the whole book, and it's not a theme that people normally think about or identify. And it's the theme of choosing the chosen son. It starts with Cain and Abel, where God chooses the sacrifice of Abel. It goes through the more obvious choice of children, where Isaac is chosen over Ishmael, and Jacob is chosen over Esau. Jacob, in turn, has a chosen son, Joseph. In all of these situations, the choice has implications, and unfortunately, they're not very good. In the case of Abel, the jealousy that is generated by the choice leads to the homicide, the killing of Abel by Cain. In the case of Isaac and Jacob, there is a jealousy and an acrimony that lasts not only for the life of the protagonists, but for their descendants as well. And there are many who say all of the trouble and tribulations that befall the Jewish people in Egypt are because of Jacob's favoritism to Joseph, who was thrown into a pit and sold into slavery. Looking into it a little bit deeper, one begins to realize there is another trend. And that trend is the choice of the younger child, going against the accepted hierarchy of the firstborn, whether it's God in choosing Abel, or in the patriarchs choosing their secondborn or younger child. They add insult to injury by passing over that son who, by all tradition, should be the chosen son. As Tevye so eloquently pointed out, being chosen is not altogether a blessing. God, why can't you choose someone else for a change? Being the chosen people has been a sense of pride, but certainly coming with it is the onus of jealousy and hatred from those who are not chosen. In a book that was just published by Bernard Henry Levy, the French philosopher, called The Genius of Judaism, the understanding or the misunderstanding of what it means to be a chosen people is the main subject of the book. I have not yet had a chance to read the book, but from reviews of it, the gist of Levy's argument is that being chosen does not suggest superiority. It means that the Jews are guardians of a treasure of knowledge found in sources that Levi encourages every Jew to master. But nonetheless, one senses in it, as in most discussions and treatments of the chosen people by Jews, a certain level of apologetic or polemic, a defensive response, a defensive argument. In another book called The Chosen Peoples, America, Israel, and the Ordeals of Divine Election, Todd Gitlin and Lael Leibovitz argue that what really unites America and Israel is the sense of a chosen destiny that both countries share, because unlike every other modern country, these two states were formed based on an idea more than anything else. And here too, one senses that one needs somehow to make an argument for exceptionalism, for being chosen, for the obligation that it entails, but nonetheless the privilege that goes along with it. And what's fascinating to me, especially after finishing the book of Genesis, is that when looking at the book, it's quite clear what chosen means. The firstborn is the entitled, landed gentry, that person who, by all laws and mores, should be the recipient of the double blessing. And by passing over that firstborn, one actually gets a message against entitlement. Nowhere is it actually articulated until we get to the end of Genesis, when Joseph, the prince of Egypt, brings his two sons to his ailing father for a blessing. In Genesis 48:13, we read, "And Joseph took them both, Ephraim in his right hand toward Israel's left hand, and Manasseh in his left hand toward Israel's right hand, and brought them near unto him. And Israel," who was Jacob, "stretched out his right hand and laid it upon Ephraim's head, who was the younger, and his left hand upon Manasseh's head, guiding his hands wittingly." The word for wittingly comes from the same root as the word seichel, with common sense, with intentionality. For Manasseh was the firstborn. So we have a situation where Jacob has his arms crossed over and is putting his right hand on the younger and his left hand on the older. And he blessed Joseph and said, "The God before whom my fathers Abraham and Isaac did walk, the God who hath been my shepherd all my life long unto this day, the angel who hath redeemed me from all evil, bless the lads, and let my name be named in them, and the name of my fathers Abraham and Isaac, and let them grow into a multitude in the midst of the earth." And when Joseph saw that his father was laying his right hand upon the head of Ephraim, it was evil in his eyes. And he held up his father's hand to remove it from Ephraim's head unto Manasseh's head. And Joseph said unto his father, "Not so, my father, for this is the firstborn. Put thy right hand upon his head." And his father refused and said, "I know it, my son, I know it. He also shall become a people, and he also shall be great. However, his younger brother shall be greater than he, and his seed shall become a multitude of nations." And he blessed them that day, saying, "By thee shall Israel bless, saying, God make thee as Ephraim and as Manasseh." And he set Ephraim before Manasseh. So in the text, they clearly identify the issues. They have Joseph, who is part of the hierarchy of Egypt, a prince in Egypt, saying this is not the right way to do things. And of course, we have to keep in mind the later plague of the killing of the firstborn, which in a sense also could be interpreted as a rejection of the entitled class the ruling class of Egypt. And to this, Jacob says, no, I know exactly what I'm doing. I'm not some old guy who's lost his wits. I'm doing it wittingly. And in this particular case, the younger shall be greater than the older. What's different about this story from all of the other similar stories that we've encountered in Genesis is that we do not get a sense that there is any sibling rivalry or jealousy between Manasseh and Ephraim. And so, in a sense, when this becomes therefore a blessing, that all Israel shall bless its children, and by the way, this is the blessing that parents bless their children with every Friday night, maybe the blessing is exactly this, that the opposite of chosen is not rejected. The opposite of chosen is entitled. And if the Jews were singled out as a chosen people, it is not because they were exceptional. It was because they lacked all class, title, or land title, or prior rights, or natural rights. The chosen people are the personification of the unentitled and the dispossessed. And so it is a blessing that contains within it the simple message to every child: nothing in this wonderful world is yours by right or by privilege. You must earn your blessings and learn to respect those who earn their blessings, even if they outperform you. God make thee as Ephraim and as Manasseh. So one could easily understand both the blessing and this theme throughout Genesis as an argument against primogeniture. The passing over of the firstborn is a strike against nepotism and a vote for meritocracy. And if in later Jewish history this trend continues, and when Samuel goes to find a king, and he talks to David's father, and David's father doesn't even mention his youngest son, David, who is out in the field tending the flocks, and instead pushes his older children. And Samuel says, no, I know there must be one more, and picks the youngest, picks the child who has been rejected and passed aside. Once again, we see even in the Davidic line, which ultimately was the Messianic line, a sense that Judaism favors the underdog. If we look at the history of David, on the one side, he comes from Ruth the Moabite, whose ancestor gave birth to Moab by an incestuous union with his daughter. And on the other side comes from Judah and Tamar, who acted the part of the harlot. We can only say, what an amazing philosophy, what an amazing ideology of choosing the outsider, choosing the Ivri, he who came from the other side of the tracks. And if the story ended there, we would have a beautiful philosophy of the chosen people. And in fact, we could very easily say that if the Jewish people who were the outsiders and who were exiled from their land, who were slaves in Egypt, could be chosen precisely because they were outsiders, then in fact, the real chosen of God is not a particular nation, but are any of those who espouse this beautiful philosophy and ideology of meritocracy and of caring for those who are cast aside. But just as in the simple reading of the chosen, where those who are chosen feel that they are superior to those who have not been chosen, the truth is that when one has a philosophy of being chosen because one is the outcast, one is the victim, that one can just as easily fall into the same rut of competitive victimization, where different peoples will claim that they in fact are the chosen because their plight has been worse than the others. Their rejection has been more extreme than the others. And the first time that we see an instance of this unhealthy competition, and the first time that we see that in fact Nothing was resolved with Manasseh and Ephraim, even though the Bible would have us believe that it was resolved, was in the conflict between Judaism and Christianity. So in the one verse that personifies this concept of God choosing those who are rejected is in Psalms 118:22. The stone which the builders rejected is become the chief cornerstone. Even moasu habanim hayita lerosh pina. And the Midrashic story that gives context to this verse is, by tradition, when the temple was to be built, no utensil could be used to bang and form the stones. They were brought from a quarry outside of Jerusalem. And as a result, all of the stones were fitted together very perfectly. And as the builders, according to the Midrash, were building the temple, they came across one very irregular shaped stone, one very odd stone indeed. And because of its oddness, they threw it away. The word that the verse in Psalms uses, moasu habanim mis, in Yiddish, is like a miskite, something which is disgustingly ugly. So they threw away this disgusting stone and they continued to build. And as they reached the top of the dome, they were left with a very irregular shape. And one of the builders remembered that irregular stone that was cast away, and he went and he found it, and sure enough, it fit perfectly into the precipice of the dome, and it became the Rosh Pinah, the cornerstone of the temple. And Rashi, based on the Midrash, comments, Derech mashal shahayu ha'amim mevazin oto ubesof hitgaber alehem o yidaber beruach hakodesh al Yisrael. That, in fact, this verse is an allegory for the people of Israel who have been rejected by the world, and speaking with divine inspiration, it talks of Israel ruling supreme. So, of course, we see the flip side of being rejected and chosen is that one gets to be supreme over everyone else. Ultimately, chosenness, no matter how one defines it, includes the baggage of superiority. But the point here that Rashi makes based on the Midrash is that this was taken by the Jewish people to personify their plight and their glorious future. So in Matthew 21, starting with verse 42, Jesus said to them, "Have you never read in the Scriptures, the stone the builders rejected has become the cornerstone? The Lord has done this, and it is marvelous in our eyes. Therefore I tell you that the kingdom of God will be taken away from you and given to a people who will produce its fruit. Anyone who falls on this stone will be broken to pieces. Anyone on whom it falls will be crushed." When the chief priests and the Pharisees heard Jesus' parables, they knew he was talking about them. So in the New Testament and later Christianity, they took this parable of the stone and they turned it on its head. The Jews were now the entitled class, whether through the priests or the Pharisees, and Jesus and his followers were the rejected. They were now the victims. They were the ones who were unentitled, and they were taking the mantle of the rejected stone that would become the cornerstone. And so we have now a conflict over who is the most rejected. In an amazing book written by a professor from the Hebrew University named Israel Jacob Yuval and called Two Nations in Your Womb, Perceptions of Jews and Christians in Late Antiquity and the Middle Ages, the author takes 1,000 years of history and defines the conflict between Christianity and Judaism as a conflict between who would wear the crown of the rejected servant of God. And so we may have thought that defining chosenness as a vote for those who have been cast aside, and therefore a choice that would lead to peace and harmony and respect for the powerless. Historically, as we trace this idea, it actually became the source of a new conflict of who was to wear the mantle of the powerless. It's amazing that Christianity, in fact, has embraced the concept of picking the younger brother over the entitled firstborn and retained it more than the Jews have, to the point that when Pope John Paul II in 1986 went to a Rome synagogue to pray, he said to the Jewish people, and they all smiled when he said it, "You are our beloved brothers. You are our elder brothers in the faith of Abraham." Now, it was said, I'm sure, with all the benevolence that we would expect, and it signaled the acceptance of the Catholic Church of the Jews. But nonetheless, it was a backhanded compliment, because by calling the Jews the older brother, the Pope was implying that the Christians were the chosen younger brother. More recently, Pope Francis described the Jewish people as the big brothers of his Roman Catholic flock, in words of solidarity marking the 75th anniversary of Kristallnacht. So it would seem that the Pope is more aware of this theme within Genesis and this very strong concept within Judaism, where God favors the younger brother. And so while Catholicism, on the one hand, is reaching out to the Jews, in doing so, it is also claiming to be the chosen younger brother. And so, again, we see that no matter what interpretation one gives for chosenness, ultimately, the friction, the sense of superiority of one over the other remains and is retained. Amos Oz has recently characterized the conflict between the Jews and the Palestinians as the conflict between two victims, between two refugee camps. And one can clearly see how both camps want to claim the mantle of the ultimate victim. So I guess, even though I think we do have a better insight into the revolutionary nature of the claim of chosenness in the Hebrew Bible, ultimately we come back to the concept that any form of chosenness leads to conflict. Any form of chosenness leads to a sense of superiority, whether it's a superiority because one believes that one has a sense of entitlement, or whether it is a sense of superiority because one believes that one is the ultimate victim, the ultimate unentitled party. So I don't really have an answer or an explanation that makes this concept of chosen into a blessing. All I can say is the blessing that we do say every Friday night, in a sense, recognizes that we do live in a world where there are favorites, where none of us are equal. And if we're lucky, we won't make the mistake of Jacob and overtly crown one son as superior to the other. But nonetheless, there will be times where one child of God is blessed with powers, characteristics, gifts that are not blessed upon the other. And all that we can hope for is that our children will love each other, and that we will try to give God's blessing to all of our children in as equal a way as that we can, and hope that our children, both individuals and the children of the world, do not lower themselves to argue about who is more entitled or who wears the mantle of the less entitled, but live together in peace. And we should also recognize how primary this sense of trying to be fair is to making the world a better place. There are only two biblically prescribed blessings. One is the priestly blessing, and the other is the blessing of Manasseh and Ephraim. And this, I think, is a testament to how unresolved and nonetheless how important it is to try against all odds to be as fair as we can. So today, as always, we end the podcast with a song, and I know we did Shlomo Korbach last week, but what can I do? He sings the songs. And so today we finish with Shlomo Korbach singing Even Ma'asu Habanim Hayta Lerosh Pina, and it includes in Hebrew the midrash that we used in the podcast today.
ישנו מדרש, ישנו מדרש, ישנו מדרש על הפסוק אוי אבן מעשו הבונים הייתה לראש פינה אבן מעשו הבונים הייתה לראש פינה לראש פינה אבן מעשו הבונים הייתה לראש פינה מידע שם הייתה זו מידע שם הייתה מהמדרש אבן 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 אחת שמעשו הבונים בונה בית המקדש כולם קדושים כולם טהורים בהם עשו את האבן וזרקו את האבן פסלו את האבן אבל אחר כך כשבנו את בית קודש הקודשים אני רוצה להגיד לכם, יש אפשר יהודי שלא שייך לקדושה אבל לקודש קודשים כל יהודי, כל יהודי, כל יהודי שייך כשכהן הגדול נכנס לקודש קודשים הוא הוציא את כל עם ישראל מעומק השפלות ראו שלמעלה בגג צריכים עוד אבן לגמור את הבניין הקדוש ולא מצאו אף אבן אחד שמתאים ופתאום זכו את הדמעות של האבן זכו את הדמעות של האבן שיזכה לקדש את שמו הגדול והקדוש מעשו המון בעצם כל יהודי, בעצם כל עם ישראל, עם אומות העולם, הם חושבים שאנחנו עושים, אנחנו פסולים ליישוב העולם, וכשיבוא המשיח ידעו שאנחנו ראש פינה.
Mira